Hello everybody, I am the Cynic. How did we get here? How did the Western world come to this self-destructive economic state, with our countries getting involved in wars we can't afford, that are both immoral and contradictory on the part of the United States, funding our enemies like Al-Qaeda, or the Syrian rebels, and the Taliban, sending money to other countries in foreign aid while people here go hungry and fighting for democracy in areas where the people hate our heathen guts. Also, how did we become a society with such gynocentric and misogynistic under/overtones? A society where our fathers invented and produced industrial-grade conveniences by their own blood, sweat, and tears so that the women could both enjoy and demean their sacrifice. Well, I'll try to answer these questions as best I can, and even answer how both of these issues use the same means of psychological manipulation in order to become the problems that they are today. Edward Bernays, nicknamed the architect of the consumer mind, was one of the most brilliant minds in subtle manipulation of mass group psychology and sociology, studying the works of his uncle Sigmund Freud, and many great minds of the past, such as French social psychologist Gustave Le Bon, who wrote the revolutionary book called Psychologie des Foules, which roughly translates into The Crowd, a study of the popular mind, a book studied well by tyrants like Hitler and Mussolini. He, Bernays, was the one who turned the American war machine into making the world safe for democracy, quote-unquote, and having people believe it, even with great evidence to the contrary. See the Dirty War of Chile between 1976 and 1983, King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia, current day, and the Shah of Iran in the 1953 coup, and the CIA's involvement. Links will be below. Even more so, he is also a contributor to early-day feminism, as well as its psychological evolution and its gripping of the mainstream society. His most famous feminist-linked campaign being the quote-unquote Torches of Freedom, in which women would parade themselves up and down Union Square, smoking cigarettes to protest their oppression by men, and the taboo of women smoking, or the perceived oppression by men.
And it occurred to me that any young debutante who was aware of the times and of herself as a woman being discriminated against would be delighted to walk in the Easter parade with her beau to dramatize the idea that cigarettes were indeed torches of freedom, to validate and to invalidate the taboo against women smoking. So I called up a debutante friend of mine, asked her to get another friend and two young men whom they liked, and I also instructed them on how to give information about what they did to the newsreels, weekly newsreels, to the newspapers, to the three important press associations, the AP, the United Press, and International News Service, and to walk from 34th Street to 57th and back and forth, lighting torches of freedom to protest man's inhumanity to women by a taboo against smoking. Next morning, there wasn't a newspaper in the United States, even the New York Times had a front page story, "Debutantes light torches of freedom to protest man's inhumanity to women by a taboo against smoking," lighting cigarettes in their walk.
Now what you saw Bernays do right there is what we refer to as manufacturing consent. Manufacturing consent plays on the fact that the majority of the population holds no real knowledge of the more difficult and complicated aspects of social and economic issues while working hand in hand with the Hegelian dialectic problem-reaction-solution, using the mass fear and ignorance of the public in a situation that brings about said fear to gain consent from the public to implement programs and strategies that would, quote-unquote, fix the situation while simultaneously spreading the manipulators' sphere of influence and power. The situation in question can be created by the manipulators, or it can be a natural disaster or an actual event. Problem: feminism played on women's subconscious and conscious fear of being oppressed, using their large victim mentality and solipsism to convince women that because of their wanted submissive roles at the time, they were nothing more than victims of their own social conditionings. The old traditional roles being questioned along with the development of the industrialized world, in which safer conditions were provided so that more women could work and earn decent money than ever before in human history, alternative lifestyles became more available and women questioned why these newfound quote-unquote freedoms were not offered before. Reaction: when more and more women began to question the social stigmas and taboos they faced, it was only natural that their anger and overinflated victim mindset would kick in, sending the followers of feminism and its sympathizers into a frenzy of bra-burning marches and cultivating the quote-unquote sisterhood, with even more preaching about the sufferings of women, both legitimate and manufactured, even though this took ignoring the obvious hardships and dangers of the way survival worked in the pre-industrial world. Solution: instead of demanding and asserting themselves as the equals of men through outright determination in their own merits, the first, second, and third waves of feminism manipulated women into believing that the only way to make their oppression better was by fear-mongering and forcing it via government legislation, and intimidating/shaming others into conformity. This, mixed in with the Milgram experiment, where perceived authority could push unwitting humans to commit otherwise heinous acts that they wouldn't commit without the perceived authority figure coaxing them, and the findings of the Ash's conformity experiment, alteration of perception, where one participant was placed among 9 actors and judging 4 lines, 2 matching, 2 not, and determining which lines matched. The actors would start out with the obvious correct answer, but after the first 2 would all unanimously choose an obvious wrong answer. 60% of the time, the participants would conform to the beliefs of the actors around them, and 75% would go along occasionally, has led to these 3 tenets. 1. Creating carefully calculated associations with subconscious fears and the desires of individuals. Man equals bad because aggressive. Woman equals good because nurturing, using media outlets like TV shows, propaganda articles, and trivialization of some issues and overexaggerations of others to reinforce and continue exposing the negative/positive attributes of the sexes respectively. 2. Influencing opinion leaders and perceived authority figures in order to reach those who follow them. Feminist leaders, politicians, CEOs, Tea Party leaders, radio show hosts, basically anyone who has a large audience of listeners, are influenced by a variety of means like bribery, blackmail, or simple conversation to manipulate the leader's rhetoric and thus implant the manipulator's ideas into the leader's followers. 3. Initiating the contagion of behaviors and ideas through social conformity. Mass conformity enforced by social means. Shaming language, ostracization, abandonment, threats, and violence being the most effective means of enforcing such ideas, thereby coaxing the indifferent and attacking those who dissent. The carefully calculated fears, weapons of mass destruction, and buzzwords such as Al-Qaeda and 9/11. The opinion leaders, mainstream news sources, and popular radio personalities like Rush Limbaugh and Fox News, as well as the President of the United States himself, George Bush. Initiating the behavior through social conformity, the phrase, support the troops. Ask yourself for a moment, what does that even mean, support the troops? Support them how? Well, funny thing is that it wasn't really about supporting the military personnel, but supporting the war in Iraq. To go against the war in Iraq was synonymous with going against the troops. I mean, if so many people were so concerned about supporting the troops, then 33% of veterans wouldn't be homeless right now. Ask yourself how many of these support the troop folks give part of their paycheck to support their local VA, or how many of them protested the military benefits cuts. Chances are, not too many, if they're being honest. Now, the phrase equality for women is equally as vague and meaningless. Equality in what? Freedom? Well, we can get rid of affirmative action and let employers decide on what's what from there like they do men, but I think we can all imagine the literal hissy fit that would inevitably come. The phrase war on women being touted repeatedly. So is it representation, outcome, opportunity? It's hard to say, and that's the best part for feminism. Equality for women means the same thing as support the troops, which is support whatever women, or the troops, are doing at the time. And if you fail to do so, you obviously must hate women, or the troops, and are shamed into silence and submission at the will of social conformity, in alliance with problems that can be vaguely interpreted at best. Problems like women being offended in anything, or the government needing to, quote-unquote, make the world safe for democracy. Now that I've given you some examples of how these tenets have been applied in both feminism and government, I think it's time we talk a little bit about how we can use them for a more honest and positive approach. These tactics are more than at our disposal should we choose to implement them. Instead of millions necessary to purchase TV slots, billboards, and newspaper articles, memes, pictures, and quotes can be spread around the internet with the mere push of a button at little to no cost. Understand these tenets, research the works of Edward Bernays and Gustave Le Bon, and come to terms with the fact that these psychological manipulations have been used as a weapon against not only men, but against people as a whole for decades. Now, as far as my contribution to what to do to help men and their sons and daughters stay together, that's easy, and the best part is, it doesn't require any lying to do it. Pictures of children suffering because of absent fathers, or children who've been killed by their mothers, would be quite effective works in exposing the falsehoods of the current mindset that children don't need their dads. A crayon-drawn story of a child longing for their missing male figure would be another. Maybe a teen looking around in sadness, seeing other children with their fathers, but none of his or her own. A picture asking, "Mommy, why did you tell me to lie to police about Daddy?" with a child looking at his or her mother, who's holding a restraining order against him with the words, "false accusation," in big, bold red letters on it. Seeing the trend? I can hear it now. Some of you might be saying that it's underhanded to use children to push an agenda. Well, that would beg the question if children are really being quote-unquote used to push an agenda, or given a means to tell their own stories. People may claim that the pictures and quotes being used are from impressionable and unwitting minors who have no idea what they are saying or doing, but I'm of the belief that if a child can testify in court against what their parents have done against them, they are more than able to testify to the public for what their parents have done for them. People want to care about the children? Well, let's give them the opportunity to listen to what the children have to say, before mothers get the chance to poison the child's mind against the fathers. Of course, the children aren't the only ones suffering from this system. Pictures of grown men slumped over in a small and empty room with a single bag of clothing at his side, the caption, "All I have after divorce," read underneath him. Or taking someone like Brian Banks or Jonathan Montgomery, with the caption, "I spent years in prison over a false rape allegation. What protection do we have?" or "What protection did I have?" Now, a more anti-feminist message would be to use slogans such as, "I'm a woman determined to prove herself on her own merits. I don't need preferential treatment of feminism to be on the same level as men." Or, "I am a real woman. I take care of my own business. I don't need government assistance to purchase birth control or feed my children." Get a little creative on the delivery, but always maintain the truth. Always bearing in mind that the greatest weapon of those looking to oppress are the minds of the oppressed and their compliance. Or you could, try to bring enlightenment to the public about the problem, reaction, solution, Hegelian dialectic, and the tenets of manufacturing consent, thereby inducing a state of cognitive dissonance to any who'd listen. Those with an almost inability to imagine that women aren't oppressed and weren't oppressed throughout the ages after being bombarded since they were old enough to read with politically correct dogma. Yeah, good luck with that, though. Alright, and that concludes this video. And with that, I'd like to make a brief announcement. I'll begin my channel's first series, called Psychological Warfare, where I'll be going over some of the more common day-to-day psychological manipulations that both blue pill men and women use against men, and ways to both cope and even turn it against the manipulator. About time I lived up to the other half of my namesake. In terms of this video itself, bear in mind that this is all from my interpretation. Perhaps you agree, perhaps you don't. All I offer is a different perspective. I am the cynic, everybody. Have a nice day.